And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. India's middle class is on the rise. If India's economy continues to grow as predicted, by 2025, the Indian middle class will number 583 million people, or 41% of India's projected population. We begin today's Open Connection as MLA Ellis shares about global energy needs.
I didn't realize how small this world is in terms of energy until I started exploring LNG in 2004. In 2004 to 2017, we had, at a minimum, 18 LNG projects on the books here in BC, mainly with the idea to export clean LNG from BC to Asia. Hopefully we're going to expand to India, because these are countries that are still developing and they're actually still burning a lot of coal to actually produce electricity. India, for example, 70% of its electricity comes from coal burning. China is still continuing to build coal plants today. But recently what we saw over in Europe was Ukraine being invaded by Russia. And that's an old conflict. But underlying that was some issues around energy. Germany, for example, followed the clean energy program 100%. So they shut down their LNG plants, they shut down their nuclear plants, and they went entirely on wind and solar. Unfortunately, the wind didn't blow every day, the sun didn't come out every day, and then they realized that they actually have no backup. They have no LNG backup, they have no nuclear power backup. And then, so they ended up having to depend on Russia for LNG to provide power for their plants and for electricity. Well, at the same time, what they didn't realize was those energy costs were going to be 5 times higher for German residents than those costs were 5 years ago. And then the Ukraine war breaks out. And now everybody's scrambling because Russia actually doubles the amount of LNG that they need. They doubled the amount of oil that they need for Russian purposes. So they got a surplus. And now Europe has become dependent on Russia. Quite the sad situation to be in when Russia is actually invading a European country, and yet supplying resources like wheat to the world, supplying LNG to the world, supplying oil to the world, including, hey, get this, Russia supplying oil to the United States. That is crazy. Meanwhile, the United States refuses to take oil from Canada, but they're okay taking oil from Russia. Now with the absence of Russian oil, because the United States no longer wants to take Russian oil, they're looking to countries like Venezuela instead of looking at projects from Canada like Keystone. I mean, we're living in a world that has a foundation of energy, and it's now gotten to the point now when we're talking about geopolitics, energy is going to be a huge discussion point. And all of this wrapped up together is actually going to contribute even more so to the high prices we're seeing at the pumps. And it's going to cause a lot of, in my view, it's going to cause a lot of disruption to the trade relationships that you have all around the world. China is watching. India is watching. I mean, everybody's starting to understand now they need if they don't have a good supply of energy, they need to stockpile and they need to create renewed relationships. Canada is not part of that discussion. BC is not part of that discussion, which is, it doesn't seem right. When we have this vast resource of LNG in BC, and we don't want to contribute to what's happening over in Europe to actually get them off the dependency they have on Russian fuel and Russian energy. You could actually get LNG Canada's full scope of their project as proposed initially, which was 26 million tons, Get that approved right away so that LNG Canada doesn't have to waste time getting those additional permits for the remaining 20 million tons that they have on the books. Right now, LNG Canada is only approved for 6 million tons, which doesn't make any sense. And it's my understanding that they will not actually even consider the approval of 20 million tons until 2030. This doesn't make sense because as Chief Counsel of the Haisla Nation, I was of the understanding that 4 trains totaling 26 million tons was always the goal.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. British Columbia has the second largest natural gas reserves in Canada and is a reasonable shipping distance from Asian markets. These are just some of the reasons why LNG Canada decided to invest over $40 billion building a site in Kitimat. Let us return to the conversation with MLA Ross.
And according to the provincial government here in BC, they insinuated that it was LNG Canada's decision not to approve that additional 20 million tons. That doesn't make sense. Why would LNG Canada only self-approve 6 million tons, which would probably only cover the cost of building the plant in the first place over 20 years, and not even consider the additional 20 million tons? That doesn't make sense to me at all. Then you've got Chevron. Supposedly they were mothballed. They were proposed at 18 million tons annually. Well, Chevron left town along with his partner Woodside. But something interesting happened this past year. Enbridge bought the pipeline certificate for the Pacific Trails pipeline, which actually was the pipeline that feeds into KMLG, which was owned by Chevron. Now, a company like Enbridge to purchase that pipeline, which has full First Nation support already, from Prince George, northeast BC, all the way down to Kitimat, you got the full support. The only thing they don't have is a land base to end up in now, because Chevron is decommissioning their site down in Douglas Channel right now. They're working with the Haisla to decommission that site. But Enbridge would not have purchased this if they didn't see something in their future. These are 2 projects that can actually help fill the energy crisis that we're seeing right now over in Europe. Take, for example, LNG Canada. Their project description says they're going to build this project mainly to supply Asia with LNG and other markets. It's that other markets that has me intrigued, because right now Europe is looking for energy from all sources other than Russia. We can do more. There's a lot of other smaller projects on the books. 6 other smaller projects like Cedar LNG, Top Speed LNG, Wood Fiber out of Squamish, smaller in scale, but they still have the same intent of getting LNG from BC shores to markets all around the world. So there's a lot more we could be doing. LNG Canada has a certificate in place, both federally and provincially. Yes, they got to acknowledge and work on every single permit that comes down as outlined in the certificate, but it's already a done deal. LNG Canada already made its FID, final investment decision, back in 2017. But all the parties involved failed to mention to us that was only for 6 million tons. There's ways, there's ways to actually look at how we can actually address the need to get this product to market quicker, more efficiently. But nobody's having that conversation. Nobody. And this is a worldwide demand. And this demand is going to get even bigger. Because I don't see this Russian intervention in Ukraine, this invasion, I don't see it ending soon. And even if it does, you're still going to have that energy crunch in Germany. You're still going to have that energy crunch in India. You're still going to have that energy crunch in China, Japan. I think, if anything, what this Ukraine invasion has showed us is how important energy is now in the global context, and how BC is not a part of this equation. I've seen videos, I've seen presentations, I've seen pictures of the process in terms of these modulars being delivered to these sites. And these modulars are anywhere from 10 to 20 stories high. I understand this first modular that I was witnessing was over 10 stories high. I said on Facebook it was 20, but I was staring from the other side. I was trying to figure out the height. But these are massive. And what will happen is that when these modulars come ashore, a 10-story building, a 15-story building is what you're trying to unload from this tanker. So that what I understood was what you do is you place them onto these trailers that would then kind of creep up to the site. Now I understand these modulars are self-propelled, meaning they've already got their own locomotion to get them up there. It's amazing. And you know what, there's more than 200 more to come. I mean, think about unloading 200 modulars, and each are 10 to 20 stories high. I mean, that is what we're talking about in terms of LNG investment. So when people are asking what does $40 billion pay for, it pays for all the groundwork that you've already seen. It pays for all the consultation you've already seen, especially with First Nations. It pays for the pipeline. It pays for all the development you see up in northern BC for the actual the product itself, the supply of gas, but it also pays for the actual facility. So we're going to see more and more of these modulars coming up the channel. You're going to see more the development happening down at the terminal site. And it's quite startling to me, because after a while, after doing this from 2004 to 2017, I used to get bored at looking at these presentations, right? I've seen that before. Yeah, it's a modular, great. You know, when can we start building though? That was always but when I saw the modular, I was just kind of stunned. That day finally came where the modular, I could actually see the modular.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Natural gas liquids are components of natural gas that are separated from the gas state in forms of liquids. The separation occurs at a field facility or gas processing plant. Let us return to the conversation as MLA Ross shares about a value-added petrochemical plant.
His name is Ken James. What he was talking about was trying to develop a value-added industry coming off the natural gas product. And his whole idea, his whole vision was saying, when we ship out natural gas to Asia, what they do is they strip out the byproducts, like the ethenes, and they make plastic, high-grade plastic. And then they ship that plastic back to Canadians where we buy that plastic. And so his idea was, if we can build what we call a straddle plant on a pipeline, and we take out the byproducts of LNG, we should be making plastics out of that. And then we should be selling to Boeings of the world, or the Teslas of the world, or you know, the stapler company, or the whatever this is. We should be making those plastics for the world, for our cars and for our boats and for our homes. The other thing he was talking about was saying, and I think this relates to what Russia is actually going to go through it now. Russia provides a huge amount of resources to the world, including wheat and fertilizer. And now with the sanctions going against Russia, a lot of this product is going to get taken off the market. So what Ken James was talking about was saying, well, we should be taking the byproduct, methane specifically, out of the LNG pipelines, and we should be creating fertilizer to help feed the world. I agreed with this. I agreed with all of this. Unfortunately, back when we were reviewing the LNG projects back in my time at Chief Council days, we knew this was an opportunity, but it seemed to be a distraction for us. It was taken away from our focus in terms of just getting a plant built. I think the time now, especially when everybody's talking about value added and manufacturing and talking about sending an even cleaner product to Asia, this is a conversation I don't want to lose. But the politics have got to be right, because right now there doesn't seem to be much support for LNG in BC. And people have got to understand exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about making a value-added plant, whether we're talking about in Prince George, whether we're talking about it here in Kitimat or Terrace, and what it means not only locally, but provincially, nationally, internationally. What does it mean? Because energy, it's the foundation of everything we do, but there's so much more we could be doing in terms of fertilizer, plastics, and other byproducts coming from LNG. As part of our due diligence as Chief and Counsel, we had to involve ourselves in what you call a turnpole process, and that's a federal process. So every country has shipping lanes for commercial industrial shipping lanes, and they're designated lanes, and you actually flow from the international laws and regulations in terms of marine laws. So we understood this, and the turnpole itself is a voluntary process, but it actually outlines, all the procedures, all the precautions, all the laws, both nationally and internationally, in terms of what a ship can do, how fast it can go, when does a pilot get put on, where can you dump your ballast, where can you dump your bilge. It addresses all of that. And so I understood, and it's been there forever. In fact, the international organization is called the International Maritime Organization, and they oversee shipping all over the world. So I was okay with all the shipping regulations because it's been there forever, and all we had to do was actually modify it for ships coming up Douglas Channel. LNG Canada, their modulars, they're going to be massive, and when it gets put together here, I mean, you put together at a minimum 250 of these modulars together, you're going to have a really big facility. Cedar, on the other hand, initially, along with these other smaller projects around BC, those were mainly designed as floating LNG plants, and so you can actually you can actually build these plants on barges, or you can retrofit a tanker to have these tankers come in, and then they just park your processing facility there right next to your terminal, and then you can start processing LNG and then shipping out. Another tank will come in, dock up beside your tank or your barge, take on your frozen natural gas, then ship it to Asia. The beauty in that is that very little infrastructure is needed except for your pipeline and your terminal. And if you decide at some point it's not working out, then the ship just leaves town. The barge just leaves town. That's initially what Cedar was proposed at. I understand they're still going that proposal. But when you see these smaller projects all around BC, that's what you'll be looking at. You'll be looking at floating LNG plants, whereas LNG Canada, Chevron, those were on land, terrestrial plants.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
In February of this year, Coastal GasLink Security called RCMP to help, reporting it was under attack by about 20 people, some wielding axes. In this final segment of Open Connection, MLA Ross shares his thoughts about the incident.
This time, a very well-organized assault took place on the workers out on the Coastal GasLink line. And why I say it was very well coordinated, well planned, because to go out in the middle of the woods on a Forest Service road in the middle of the night, at midnight, you got to know what you're doing. You've got to know the trails, you got to know the geography, and you've got to come well equipped to cut locks off of some of the gates. They also came with flares, firing flares at workers and the vehicles. They also came with the intent to light a truck on fire while people were still sitting inside that truck. This is criminal. This is absolutely criminal. And so it's quite interesting to see now the discussion going on nationally about what does it mean for a protest? What does it mean for an occupation? Because what happened out there actually fits the description of a violent, aggressive attack on workers. It took it to a higher level. And I don't think enough people are talking about what that actually means, because you're thinking about who was out there that night. There was natives out there that night. There was Aboriginals whose actually leaders, their elected leaders, had signed on to Coastal GasLink, along with all the other First Nations from Prince George to Kitimat. So when they were going out there and terrorizing these workers, you're actually terrorizing First Nations that supported the project in the first place. So this is getting scary, and I think it's going to relate to the whole topic that we're having, the topic of discussion we're having right now here in BC, in terms of crime and the consequences. Yes, I know we're talking about the crime in all our communities like Terrace, Kelowna, Kamloops. We know the crime's been there forever down the streets of Vancouver, but if we're going to talk about crime there, I think it's got to be crime in the full scope, especially in terms of workers who are just out there doing their job. That's all they're doing. Are we there or not? Because I had a debate in the legislature a couple weeks ago, Monday, and it was the very first debate that we had in the legislature about LNG. And the government official, the government representative that was selected to debate with me responded saying that LNG is not the answer for our communities. It's not the answer for First Nations in terms of sustainable development, which is, that doesn't make sense. Because it's all the First Nation communities that actually brought LNG to the legislature to begin with. And it wasn't until Christy Clark became Premier in 2011 where she finally agreed to start supporting LNG. And of all the First Nations from Prince George to Kitimat Village, down channel to Gitgat, down channel to Kitkatla, they all supported LNG from 2004 to 2017. So for the government to be telling British Columbians and telling First Nations future expansion of LNG is not the answer, at a time of an energy crisis affecting the world, that's affecting our affordability, our way of life, that is actually contradictory to what the rest of the world is thinking. I mean, I'm just like everybody else. I don't want to see my energy prices go through the roof, but that's where we're heading. And yes, you can talk about the supply of gas and the war in Ukraine. You can talk about COVID, but at the end of the day, we're talking about energy. That's what we're talking about. And if it doesn't affect you directly, it's going to affect you when trucking costs go up, for example. When those trucker fuel costs go up, they're going to pass that cost on to the grocery stores, and the grocery stores are going to pass it on to us. I think that we should be having a good, rational, mature conversation about energy without the hysteria, because people are going to find out what unaffordability really means. And I know life is becoming unaffordable right now, I understand that, but it's going to get worse unless we have a provincial energy strategy policy, unless we have a national energy policy. Because right now, when I'm going through this, I just feel like we're going by the seat of our pants. Where's the domestic policy for energy use, for energy prices domestically? Where's the energy policy internationally for getting our product to Asia, India, Europe? Where's the energy policy? I don't see it. I mean, right now, I think we got two directions to go. We can continue to bury our heads in the sand and pretend the energy issue is not going to affect us here in BC, or we can actually take a proactive, realistic look at where energy is heading and how it affects us locally, regionally, provincially, and nationally.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.